Good evening everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this special meeting of the Sustainable Borough Committee called specifically to deal with the call-in decision. I can remind everyone that mobile phones should be turned off or onto silent for the duration of the meeting, and can ask all members to ensure that they use the microphones throughout the meeting. Please note that the Cabinet meeting at which the call-in decision was originally taken was filmed. This meeting is also being filmed and recorded. This will include people sitting in the public gallery. A copy of the film will be uploaded to the Knowsley Council YouTube site in due course following this meeting. I'd particularly like to welcome all the members of the public in attendance this evening to observe our meeting. Before we go on to the formal business, do we have any apologies received?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Kearns and Councillor Williams have submitted apologies.
Thank you. And do we have any declarations of interest submitted?
Yes, Chair. Councillors Brennan, Finneran, Harris, McGlashan and Smith have all declared personal interest in item number 2 on the basis that they're either members of friends of various parks or on a town council. That will be reflected in the minutes. And Councillor Donnelly has declared DPI in the item and been granted a dispensation to take part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, as these members of the public here this evening, I think it would be really helpful that ourselves and officers give a brief introduce ourselves. So I'll start. I'm Councillor Sean Donnelly and Councillor for Whitefield Ward.
My name is David Moore and I'm Scrutiny and Policy Manager supporting the committee.
Yvonne Ledgerton, Assistant Exec Director of Governance.
Green Canning Democratic Services Clerks of the committee.
Eddie Connor, I'm the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhoods and I'm also a Councillor for Northwood.
My name is John Flaherty, I'm the Executive Director of Police for the Council.
I'm Rupert Casey, I'm Head of Sustainable Resources and Officer with Knowsley Council.
Hello, I'm Caroline Holmes, I'm the Public Open Spaces Manager and an officer within the Council.
Councillor Cameron Lashon, Pays Mosswell.
Councillor John Donnelly and Stockbridge Village Ward.
Councillor Ian Smith, Prescott North Ward.
Councillor Jane Aston, Cherryfield Ward.
Councillor Tony Brennan, Chevington Ward.
Councillor Jackie Harris, Cherryfield Ward.
Councillor Edna Finneran and Haywood South.
Okay.
Julie Ross, I'm officer supporting this committee this evening.
Okay. We'll now move on to the main item of our business. I think it would be really helpful if we could have a quick outline of why we're here this evening and the process that we'll follow and what the Scrutiny Committee have the power to do within this item. Can I please pass over to Dave to take us through this briefly?
Thank you, Chair. This meeting has been called because, in accordance with the rules in the Council's constitution, Councillor Donnelly, in his capacity as the Vice Chair of this committee, has submitted a call-in request in relation to the decision made by Council's Cabinet at its meeting on the 28th of November regarding the future of the Borough's parks and green spaces. When such a decision is called in and then not subsequently withdrawn, the call-in request must be considered by the relevant Scrutiny Committee at a meeting called specifically for that purpose, and that's the reason for us being here today. In making the call-in request, Councillor Donnelly was under an obligation to set out specific reasons why the original decision should be reviewed. The role of the committee this evening is therefore to consider the reasons given for the call-in request, which Councillor Donnelly will have the opportunity to present to the committee. This will be followed by the opportunity for the Cabinet Member, Councillor Eddie Connor, and the Council's Executive Director for Place, John Flaherty, to respond to those reasons. There will then be an opportunity for the members of the committee to ask questions of Councillor Donnelly and the officers. Once the reasons for calling have been covered and all member questions have been asked, it will then be for the committee to decide on the next steps. There will be 3 options available to the committee at that point. First option is to dismiss the call-in, taking the view that the concerns set out in the call-in have been appropriately addressed this evening, meaning that the original decision will stand and be acted upon immediately. The second option is to refer the decision back to the original decision makers, that's the Council's Cabinet, for the Council's Cabinet to give it further consideration, and the committee will be obliged to give its reasons for making that decision. Similarly, option 3, the committee has the power to refer the decision to full council for debate. Again, there will be an obligation on the committee to give their reasons for doing so. It should be noted that in accordance with the Constitution, neither this committee nor full council has the power to overturn the Cabinet's original decision. That could only be sanctioned by Cabinet itself. With this in mind, the committee will need to be conscious that a referral to full council would still need to be followed by a referral back to Cabinet if full council remain dissatisfied with the decision. To be absolutely clear, this committee does not have the power to change the decision previously made. It has the right to ask for it to be subject to further debate or reconsideration. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, David. In line with that process, just summarised, we will now turn our attention to the reasons for the call-in. My reasons for the call-in decision have been detailed in the original call-in request, as set out on page 59 of the agenda. So I'm now going to hand over to John Flaherty and Councillor Connor to give you a response to the call-in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, elected members and members of the public. Just in response to your criteria, Councillor Donnelly, I've set those out in what I think it would be a helpful briefing on Appendix F, page 161 of the report. What I would like to do is just bring to committee's attention a typographical error on page 63. It references in paragraph 3.5 166 sites. We know that is 161. So I just need that amended in the minutes, Chair.
Councillor Connor, do you want to respond to all?
I have the paper in front of me with the three criteria that have been called in, and my concern is that there will be more to talk about, but my concern is that the criteria for the called in, the three items, are all items that would have been dealt with further down the line. Sorry.
Again to the mic.
I do apologise. That the criteria for the call-in are three items that would have been dealt with further on the next part of the process. Plus the fact that the future of the in criteria on page, these are not numbered, but number 2, the future of the workforce. The future of the workforce was not discussed by the review board in any way at all. It was not discussed, but it was not the proper place to do that. That would have been done, I hope, as the business plan continues down the line. The rationalisation for the disposal, at no point did the review board, which is what we're talking about here, in any way get involved with selection of any of the sites at all. That was all done by officers. The review board, again, we are all councillors, we didn't want to take any part in anything that would put us at one side or the other. And the final one, the third one, is that the financial implications of the methodology in adopting the assumption of a 4 million endowment. Again, this needed to go forward to the business plan, where the business plan would bring forward to us how we were going to do it, what method we were going to use to bring us this 4 million 40 million endowment with a 1.3 million each year to pay for the work that was required to keep our parks and gardens in excellent condition. So that's where I stand as such. Anyone else?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cannon, thank you, John. Now it's over to the committee to ask any questions of myself or Councillor Connor or John about the call-in and responses they have given. It is really important that members of the committee keep their questions focused and relevant to this item, and this is not an opportunity for long statements. Can I ask anyone who's got a first question? Councillor Glashan.
Taken from the response from our cabinet member, would these issues have been addressed in local council, or with everybody's who was interested being there, and with these problems or whether it workforce etc. be addressed, as you say, further down the line, and what might that timescale have been?
Thanks, Councillor McGlashan, for the question. So, in accordance with the Cabinet response and recommendation 13 of that response, it was quite clear that Cabinet expected this work to be done over the next 12 months, and that the outline business case and the full business case that would have addressed all of the issues to do with the endowment, the establishment of the trust, the workforce related matters would all be considered at both the outline and the full business case, and that was to be reported back to full Cabinet. We anticipated in October 2018. In terms of who would be involved in that process, the officers would be working alongside a number of technical advisors and consultants to help bring together those governance arrangements, the assessment of the endowment, the viability of this as a full business case, and we will bring that back for members' consideration at Cabinet next year.
Thanks, Chairman. It's just that as long as it had come back to members to complete the circle before they went again with those recommendations. Thanks for that, Chairman.
Absolutely, Chair. Just to emphasise, this was not the final decision. The final decision will be making by Cabinet. We anticipate in October, November 2018.
Councillor Ashton.
Thanks, Chair. I note the comments of both the Executive Director and the Cabinet member, and I fully understand it does clearly state that that is the case, that a business plan is due to come before Cabinet in the autumn of next year. However, my question would, if I can flip it the other way, would it not have been more prudent to have the business plan and the workforce, the future of the workforce, all designed before this Cabinet decision was taken?
The methodology that the Council commissioned 9 months ago, I think it was now, was for an independent board to undertake that review, undertake that research, to go out and visit other places where they'd seen this these evidence of success of how Parks of the Future might be managed, and to report that back to the Council. They didn't have a role in considering those matters that are subject to the call-in. That would be a matter for the Council to undertake. So the purpose of Cabinet at its meeting of the 28th of November was to consider the recommendations and the full report from the independent body, and to agree or take a different perspective on those recommendations. Clearly, the workforce and the trade unions have been involved in consultation and discussions as this important piece of work has progressed. The workforce are absolutely the magic that makes this thing happen moving forward, and we will be engaged with them on a routine basis over the next 12 months. There is further considerable and technical advice to be undertaken and to be achieved, and we anticipated breaking this into 2 stages, one where the independent report could be considered, and then secondly where the detailed work and those implications could be further considered. So it was broken down specifically into those 2 pieces of work. Councillor Ashton.
Councillor Ashton, then Smith, and then Brennan.
Just on that point, I think that's probably where the concerns have arisen, because I accept and fully understand the reason for the review board to have made their recommendations to Cabinet. That's a piece of work that was asked of them, and they did that very well. But that's only a piece of work to be used in conjunction with the establishment of the business plan, the future of the workforce, etc. And I would have thought that that would have been used to come to the conclusions of whether the business plan would stack up to meet those objectives outlined in the report by the review, but not to come to Cabinet so soon without having gone through the process of the business plan and the future of the workforce. It would only be there as a piece of information to inform the larger body of work.
Thank you. Can I say I understand totally what Councillor Ashton's saying. I understand, had we not said that we were going to follow a pattern with the excuse me, with the board and then the business plan and everything, I understand where we could have, your idea is that we should have done it all at once and had all the information, and maybe looking back it's a sensible thing to do, but at the time of what we were looking at, we didn't know what the board was going to say. We didn't know where it was going. I understand what you're saying now would have been far more sensible to have it all run in coherent and then bring it all to the board at once. I do understand what was said, but it was our opinion that until we knew what we were going forward with, we could have been using a lot of office time, a lot of effort, and really not known.
I've got Councillor Smith next, and then Brennan, then Harris.
Yes, just a specific question, Chair. Do you think the board would have produced such a report with these recommendations in Appendix F regarding the choices of sites and also the workforce has been mentioned, particularly, you know, where members of that board were members of town councils, for instance, that have been named subsequently by the cabinet member and the executive director, and it, you know, becoming a political decision rather than one that is independent, which perhaps, you know, I think really some people might feel they've been hoodwinked, particularly members of the board.
Thank you very much. No, I don't. I think the board done a really excellent job. The board had a really, really tough ask. It was very hard to come to a decision. Lots of people on the board had different ideas. They worked strenuously. They put an awful lot of hard time in to come up with what we believe was the best result for Knowsley. And I believe the work that was put in was quality. I believe that it was done in the very best intentions, and I believe what's come out of it has been quality as well. Thank you.
Councillor Brennan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I just want to touch again on this issue of viability. You know, we've looked at this in terms of, you know, I understand the issues and the difficulties around paying for our parts and what we want to do. Everyone was fully there, and a good intention of this. Well, good intentions also have, you know, consequences, and I want to talk through a little bit around that. We talk about the viability. We've got a situation where maybe there was a top-down approach in terms of the strategic view which we need, but in terms of viability, wouldn't it have been better going on Jane's point of view of actually looking at the various people that needed to be involved, the key stakeholders? I know there was some work done, and bringing that forward and saying, well, okay, you know, let's have a look at how it's going to be done. Let's look at how it's going to be done before we went with such undue haste. And I point to the issue around the trust's founding principles. So the viability issue again, the how. Why didn't we wait? Okay, and looking at it in terms of we have, you know, we're going to be looking at annual business plans. It's been stated there, and we're going to have a business plan. And I'll just point out there'll be a trust, and that trust will be required to prepare and approve 5-year strategies on this basis in terms of business planning. So is the Cabinet already agreeing to create a trust board, even though a robust business case hasn't even been agreed? So 2 issues, 3 issues: viability, undue haste, and the robust case where we're actually looking at doing something before, that's on a run before we can walk. I'd like your thoughts on that, please.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Brennan. In regard to viability, the boards were given a substantial undertaking to spend a period of 9 months looking at best practice across the whole of the country. They had a number of meetings. I think there were 8 meetings that they had. They had a number of visits across the country to see where this best practice was already in place. For the likes of Milton Keynes, that have been involved in running a successful trust and endowment programme for over 20 years. The involvement of the key stakeholders was absolutely fundamental to the establishment of the board, the independent review board. There were indeed, as Councillor Smith said, representatives there from the town and parish councils. There was elected member representatives. There were specialists in their field. There were community representatives. There were friends of groups. That was absolutely a fundamental element of involving all those who were passionate, who were experts in their field, who had that community influence in being represented on that board. We tried to ensure that that board was manageable, so there were 20 members on that board, and as Councillor O'Connor said, they spent a considerable amount of their own time, volunteered their time across the country, undertaking this research, doing that analysis, looking at all those case studies, looking at best practice, in order to formulate their ideas and recommendations to Cabinet. They were supported by a number of technical experts in their field for each of their meetings, who helped them think through what the £40 million endowment could look like, what the issues and risks and implications and opportunities were from that. They were able to go and speak to numerous other trusts around the country, not just to listen to what officers' views were, but to listen to what the community's views were, the friends of groups were within those trusts, those trustees, to see how successful those programmes were, to see what the opportunities and challenges and difficulties that they experienced in setting that trust up and protecting those special places. So in terms of viability, Chair, Councillor Brennan, they went through a robust process with technical expert advice to arrive at their conclusions. In terms of haste, they spent a considerable period of time deliberating those issues. The Council considered their recommendations. The Council recognised that there was still a considerable journey to be undertaken to look at the outline business case and the full business case, and on balance the Cabinet felt that that was appropriate at that time to support those recommendations and to take forward those key pieces of work. I completely accept Councillor Aston's view. You know, there's different ways of slicing and dicing a piece of work like this. You could do all of the work up front, and maybe from its beginning, the project, maybe in 2.5 years' time, we might have arrived at a position where we could have made a recommendation to the Council. But like most major development schemes of this scale, of this level of risk, of this level of sensitivity, of this level of importance to the community and importance to the Council, the officers' advice was to split this up into chunks where we could deal with the recommendations and then get on with the implementation of the full business case. In terms of how robust that piece of work was, I think it is best practice. I think we are not the only local authority in the country to walk this path, but we will certainly have the eyes of every other local authority in the country on this Council in the decision that it's taken, because this service is a discretionary service. The Council is not funded for the maintenance of parks. There is no national funding made available for that. The RSG, the Revenue Support Grant, doesn't make provision at a national level for the councils to be funded for this, and the Council faced a position where they could either, with its reducing budget of losing 86 million since 2010, a further 15 million over the next 2 years, face the decision to either suffer death by 1,000 cuts for the parks, or to actually take a radical approach, a radical new solution, and to think through this carefully and over a long period of time, and make sure that that robust case returns back to Cabinet in October next year for their further consideration. Chair, Councillor Brennan.
Okay, I've got Councillor Harris, if that's all right.
Can I just come in on?
Yeah, go.
You talk about the robust case. All I'm saying, John, is that maybe the robust case could have been up front, right, rather than waiting for to move on to the strategic point of view. The robust case should have been looked at further, you know, up front in terms of what I'm saying. Would you not agree? And if we didn't do that, does that increase the risk factors, which I want to come on to later as part of the discussion?
Councillor Brennan, I think you're making the same point as Councillor Aston. You know, there is different ways of dealing with major schemes of this scale and sensitivity, and you know, there will be different views and different opinions on how you manage schemes of this scale, and we felt it appropriate at that time, and we stand by that decision, that it was appropriate to recognise the scale of the work and the importance of the work that the independent board had undertaken. The fact that they'd engaged with 2,500 residents as part of the consultation process, and the residents were clear about what their preferences were in moving forward. There's different ways of dealing with it, Chair, and we stand by the advice that we gave to the elected members at that time. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to introduce Councillor Harris, and then I've got a couple of questions, and then Councillor Smith.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to ask how were elected members consulted over this process? Question 2 is another regarding what was the consultation method used within the wards and parish councillors regarding the 17 sites that have been named? Thanks, Chair.
Can I start off with the 17 sites? The criteria was set out in the report, and at no point did the board itself have anything to do with the sites. The sites were done by officers. There was no member involvement in it. The sites were picked. Well, picked is the word. The sites were chosen as the sites that would most benefit. What we needed to do was to get to our £40 million and be able to keep all of the 90% of our parks open forever. Elected member consultation. The elected members were kept informed of all, most of the board's amendments and readings. We were sent out by our chair, constantly given updates throughout the March to November. We put out as much information as possible, plus members could take part, like myself or anybody else, in the consultation and the 3 stages that was done through August, September and October. So there was lots of places where members and the public could get involved with the consultation.
Yeah.
Chair, if it helps, I'll ask Caroline to talk through the methodology that we used to select the 17 sites and the consultation process that we engaged with regarding that process. Would that be helpful?
Councillor Harris, do you want to ask your question before or wait for that?
Before we go into that, my question was, Eddie's saying there was an up-to-date report through the trust as the process went ahead. My question was how we as members representing our communities, we were not given any way, shape or form, might I say, the method in which you chose them 17 parks. We weren't given that as members to represent these communities. Prior to you choosing them 17 parks, we were not informed. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, you mean the list was given, you mean the list was given after the decision that we took the board's decisions, and it was passed after that, because until it was part of it, we couldn't get them out. We had to get them out after we'd made the decisions to accept the recommendations of the Parks Review Board.
Chair, I was asked about the importance of the impartial assessment that officers are undertaking in reviewing all 161 sites in order to go through the methodology to identify those 17 sites to be disposed of to protect the other 144 sites. And again, if it helps the committee, we're quite happy to talk through that assessment process and the consultation methodology that we engaged in.
Okay, well I'll ask my question as well about the 17 sites, if that's alright with the rest of the committee. Page 12 of the Cabinet report, 4.12 states, a detailed examination of the review board proposal needs to be conducted by council officers to test the viability, including a full assessment of the financial implications of the implementation. You can tell when officers wrote that. So if officers need time for detailed examination of the review board's recommendations, why was the 17 sites chosen so quickly?
Oh, can I? Yes, please. The sites, when we had the recommendation and we agreed that we were going to go forward, I think the board's recommendation was coming in on the 6th of November. And I had a meeting on the 3rd of November, which was the Friday prior to knowing that because I was on the board, I knew it was coming through. And at that time, I asked the officers to start to build up a list of sites that we would require to be able to take 10% and surrender it to help the. So on the 3rd of November, when I had my meeting with my officers, that was when I asked the officers to start putting together the list that we would require, knowing that the review board was coming on the 6th. The report, like I said.
I've just got another question before I bring Councillor Smith in.
Sorry, I've got another question before I bring Councillor Smith in. You mentioned Milton Keynes, John, and I was quite interested in that, and so I've done a bit of research myself. But the Parks Trust for Milton Keynes lost 1.2 million last year. So how confident are you that these 40 million suggested by the board will be sufficient and actually meet the needs of Knowsley?
Thanks, Chair. I'll ask Rupert to respond to that question.
Yes, Chair. So that matter was particularly looked at by the review board during their meeting, I think at the end of September. And what the review board looked at in terms of Milton Keynes was their investment over the long term. And they've been established for some 40 years now and used an endowment to fund their, to be the mainstay of their income to keep their parks in a good state of upkeep and for community use. And yes, over that period, the endowment that they have has performed very well. But when you look at it in the long term, maybe 100 years, there are ups and downs as the market changes. But when you look at it over the long term, the trajectory and the return on that investment shows a very good, sound investment proposition. So yes, there are fluctuations up and down, which you can pick up on an individual annual basis. But when you look at it in the long term, and this is where the review board was coming from, you look at it at the long term, maybe over 100 years, in perpetuity, the endowment provides a stable, secure form of funding that provides the scale and certainty that the review board felt was appropriate to sustain Knowsley's parks moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Smith, I've got Councillor Donnelly, I've got Councillor Harris, and I've got Councillor Brennan as well. So doing that order, if that's okay.
Yeah, I hope I can put this all together, but I was interested that John Farty came back to me with the wide and broad knowledge that the members of the board gained, many of them or some of them being town and parish councillors. I'm actually surprised that again Councillor O'Connor admits that the board were ignorant of the what the Cabinet were going to do with their recommendations in terms of the sites, I know from personal experience of the town councillors actually who were on the board being shocked when they found out that land that was leased to town and parish councillors from this borough were included on the list. They had absolutely no idea. And therefore, you know, my earlier question that seems to, you know, demand a little bit more respect in fact that there is and has been a disconnect between the board members and the cabinet, and also I would suggest with the consultation that was carried out as well, because I believe that if members of the public had been aware of the 17 sites coming back so quickly and the criteria as well that the board has set out at length, not least to secure political and public confidence and support, then I think maybe the cabinet would have been wiser to carry out further consultation and perhaps provide you know, other alternatives, particularly I would suggest with the town and parish councils, because I think that not just in Prescott where I represent but across the borough, those areas are in shock. Those local authorities in their own right are in shock, and you know, I think that's one of the reasons we're here tonight. But also those areas that are non-parished as well.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you.
Is yours relating, Councillor Donnelly?
It's mine just really regarding the 17 sites.
I'll let the officers and cabinet member respond.
Thank you. I must start off by saying again that the board had no idea of any list. The board didn't know about a list because that was not what we asked the board to do. We asked the board to put through the criteria, and that is correct. The criteria for the list was in the board results. And the reason that we tried to bring it quickly is that part of the consultation was that lots of residents, they wanted to know quickly what was happening to any green flags or green spaces round by there where they live. So we didn't want the thing dragging on. We needed to get as quickly as possible the list together so that people knew exactly where they stand. But at no point did the board itself have knowledge of any list or anything like that. And I think everyone was on the board, and you know, really, people were invited on the board. But what you've got to say is, the board done what we asked it to do, and the board done the criteria, give us the recommendations, and I believe the recommendations were quality recommendations.
Chair, I would just add, the reason why the board didn't consider any of the individual sites is because you would naturally gravitate to focusing on your park in your local community, or your park in your ward, or your park in your town or parish council, as opposed to taking the strategic view of the whole of the council. And that strategic view being, from the 1st of April 2019, £1.3 million was the council had agreed last year for £1.3 million to come out of the budget on the 1st of April 2019. And as such, the purpose of the independent board was to take that strategic view, strategic perspective across the whole of the borough. And as soon as you begin to share those details of individual sites, you naturally gravitate to a local perspective and not a strategic perspective. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Councillor Donnelly's got questions as well on the 17 sites, so I'll bring Councillor Donnelly in.
I understand what you're saying, John, about the strategic plan, but as a councillor of my ward, I'm there to represent the people that put me there. That's what I'm there for, and we weren't allowed to do that. I understand that you say we may be biased, but that's what we're there for. We are there to represent them, and we weren't allowed to do that. And regarding the 17 sites, and you say that and who came up with these sites, and it was the officers. Are they placed to? You don't think they need any sort of input from the people that know those sites better, like the local councillors? Because there's one on here that states about community use. Do they know about the community use more than me as a councillor? Surely that it's on there and it's used as a point, but do they know about that community use better than me?
Thanks, Councillor Donnelly. Chair, I would add, without it, please do not underestimate. You know, we are totally aware of your local role as a ward member, the local town and parish council perspective, the local community perspective. Absolutely didn't want to undermine that at all. I think in terms of the community use and the methodology for identifying the sites, Chair, again, I'll offer the opportunity for Caroline to talk us through how those sites were selected, what the rationale was that we used, how it was consulted on, and that might help inform the committee in its consideration of the item.
Okay, I'm going to go with that, if that's okay, more before any more councillors come in, if that's all right, Caroline.
Thanks, Chair. I'll start with the community engagement and consultation exercise and then move on to the site criteria, if that's okay. There is some detail on pages 38 around the work that was done by the board in terms of consulting with the public, and you'll see it's in 3 phases. 38 and 39. So the focus groups was the first phase of the engagement. Keep Britain Tidy, an environmental charity, was commissioned by the board to undertake this work. And the focus groups really were to have in-depth discussions with different stakeholders. So you can see that there was 7 focus group sessions that were held, with 63 members of the public attending those sessions. And they were broken up into general public meetings with like key stakeholders around the Friends of the Parks and other community groups, a session with parents and guardians of young children, a session with teenagers, and 2 sessions with people over the age of 65. So that those sessions were really discussion groups to test things like wording. Did people understand some of the wording that was going to go in the questionnaire, and to understand what people thought about some of the proposals. The second part of the work was, sorry.
I'm sorry, Chair, I've got to come in on that. Caroline, I know all the focus groups that you've run, and you had different friends of groups and children and parents and toddlers, Chair. Can I ask, Chair, why we're going at that stage? Why were ward councillors not involved at that stage when these focus groups were being held? Where went daytime? Why weren't we invited to that personally by an email from our officers? Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Donnelly.
Can I just come in, Mike? We would know who used these areas. There are groups that the officers do not know about, and you would not have any idea. I don't know, how are you going to reach out to people if you don't know who you're reaching out to?
If I may, Chair, if I can respond to Councillor Harris's query regarding the market research. So the board very much reflected on the need to do its public consultation in a very robust way, and its meetings between April and July of this year, they were very much in the thick of doing their research, evaluating options and coming up with their proposed way forward direction of travel for the council, which was the charitable trust and the endowment, and the sale of some parkland to fund that endowment. It then wanted to test those ideas with the public of Knowsley. What it wanted to do, though, was to make sure that that research that it undertook was statistically robust and could stand up to scrutiny. So that's why the review board decided to engage with the expertise of Keep Britain Tidy. So Keep Britain Tidy were asked to come in and do this piece of market research for the review board, which was two main phases. The first phase was the market research and telephone surveys, which was what they called the controlled research. So that was asking people who had not had any sort of previous views on this or any bias in respect to these matters, to get their viewpoint on a set of questions, the options that the review board was seeking feedback on, and that was called the controlled market research. That was statistically sound and in line with the Market Research Society's Code of Conduct and Practice, best practice. The review board then also said, well, there's a whole host of individuals and groups across Knowsley and potentially further afield who want to have a say on this important matter. So therefore, we're going to open this up during September for anybody to have their say. And that's when we had the open public consultation, where people who have got maybe more of an interest or a particular strong view on this matter to come in and have their say. So that allowed the review board to have the unbiased, controlled market research through the focus groups and telephone surveys that happened in August via Keep Britain Tidy, but then also to compare those results against that Everyone Have Your Say too, through the public consultation exercise and the range of meetings that we had with the chair of the review board and various stakeholder groups, including parish and town councils, friends of groups, and a number of other forums. And also elected members did attend those forums too. And during that consultation period, if I may just quickly, Chair, Gideon Benthoven, the chair of the review board, on a number of occasions updated all Knowsley Council elected members by email to keep them updated on the progress of the review board, the steps in the consultation and how they could get involved.
Can I just come back quickly, Chair, on that? Great. I understand where you're coming from on that, but what I'm trying to say is, yeah, there might have been updates sent to members. My question is, why were we not invited where these consultations were going on with the public and in open spaces? Why weren't we there to speak? You know, these people may be, you know, methodology-wise, you know, on the phone, doing surveys, talking to the public on the streets. They don't know how many children use our parks as we do, being in our communities. That's our role, to work in our communities. Thanks, Chair.
Can I let Councillor Brennan come in on that point?
Rufus, I'll just ask you a question. Do you think councillors make a valuable contribution to the community?
Undoubtedly so.
So, if that's the case, taking up the view that Councillor Donnelly's just said and Councillor Harris, why weren't we engaged in this thing? Given you've just said that we provided an invaluable contribution, not the only contribution, but a contribution, and we didn't have one.
Most certainly, I think chaired by the fact that there was elected members from both the town and parish councils and also the borough council on the review board, who all made a very, very proactive contribution to the work of the review board and directed the method that the review board undertook its public consultation, demonstrates the value that those local community representatives had in shaping the direction of travel that the review board made to this council.
Councillor Ashton, and then do you want to come in, Councillor Smith?
Chair, if I can just come back to a point that John made earlier, particularly surrounding the 17 sites, and the need to look strategically beyond parochial. If you don't mind me saying so, John, I think that's doing councillors a disservice. I've been on the council for 20 years and I've made some very, very difficult decisions over those 20 years, and I've always looked strategically. And obviously we all have an eye for our own wards and our own areas, because at the end of the day we're elected. But it's never stopped me from taking, and my other colleagues can all chip in as they see fit, but it's never stopped me from taking a strategic view. And I don't mind, I understand how difficult this decision is. I do feel for Cabinet, because I've been there. I know how hard it is to have to make these decisions based on the tough financial situation that we find ourselves in because of the government. But at the end of the day, you have to involve elected members in this process, because ultimately we are responsible to the electorate for those decisions. And there seems to be a gap, if you don't mind me saying so, in the way that the consultation was took place. Everybody seems to have been consulted as at different types of groups, except one really important group, and that was the elected members. Yes, we would have picked through those 17 sites and been a little bit parochial, but at the end of the day, we know that we have to make this tough decision, and I wouldn't have shirked from it. I never have in the 20 years I've been on, and I won't going forward. But I think you do a disservice saying that elected members would concentrate on their own wards and not be able to look at the bigger picture.
Okay, do you want to come back on that at all?
Just to say, I understand totally what's getting said there by Jane, and the decision for the sites was something I asked them to do. The sites themselves, we know that there may be issues with different sites, but to find one, we could continuously move them up and replace them with others. And I think that one of the biggest problems came is when I asked them not to use any of the green flag parks. Straight away that puts pressure on everything else. And I think it's important that we do keep our green flag parks, but we go back to consultation, what Jane was saying, and yes, we can all say the consultation wasn't good enough and it could be better, and I understand that, and everything can be better, and I understand that as well.
Okay, just before you come in, John, on that one, so mine's around the consultation as well, this question, but also how the officers have got to the 17 sites. So the reason, basically, I asked Caroline Holmes about Copthorne Greenfields when they were announced. One of the questions I asked was, with regards, how's the council monitored the uses of this green space? And Caroline's response in the email to myself and other fellow ward councillors for Whitefield, with regards to the park user survey, in 2014 the council employed Sustaining Places to undertake a detailed user survey to estimate the numbers and profile of the park green spaces users in Knowsley. This survey included a physical count of the number in a park together with a sample number of user surveys to understand how often they visited the park. The survey was undertaken by the community volunteering staff and environmental services, and they took over a number of time frames. But it also stated a number of green spaces were not used. You didn't go to every 161 sites. You estimated it on other sites from one site as well. So that was informed, if that's correct, that was also informed to the review board of a 2014 user survey of the parks, and we're now in 2017.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just add to that as well. Obviously, one of the questions that was raised was about how we calculate how many people use our parks, and it is extremely difficult because obviously parks and green spaces have numerous entrances. We can't put monitors on entrances. We do have information like cycle counters that we use. We collect lots of PI data on events and activities. We've got operational intelligence, so how often we empty the bins, feedback from the people actually working in the sites. But really the core data we have are the user surveys that we've done in the past, and obviously the operational data we collect for events and activities. It isn't something that we can say it's accurately updated on an annual basis or even, biannually. That's the last detailed survey we did. And to do that survey, it involved lots and lots of our friends, groups and volunteers actually sat outside at different times of the day, physically counting people, walking around parks or cycling around the parks.
Chair, could I ask that we started this about 15 minutes ago with Caroline going to explain the process of identifying the 17 parks, and we never quite got that full explanation, and that might be helpful if Caroline concluded that element of the response.
I'll give some more time, but Rupert did respond as well, just to note that.
Sorry, Chair. So in terms of the measures, you'll see on page 70, there's 6 measures that have been used, and they came from the discussions from the review board around how do you start to compare different parks and green spaces, how do people value parks and green spaces, and how do you compare when they're so different, a woodland area compared to a play area, playing fields compared to an amenity space, and that's how those measures came about. What we did is then try to place indicators against those measures so we could assess them on a fair basis based on the data that we have. So you see for the community measure, obviously it came out very strong both from the review board but also from members of the public through the consultation that those sites that are well used by the community should be protected, that they're the most important sites. So what we tried to do is find as much information as we could that would help us to measure community use. And you just heard the challenge of trying to actually count how many people visit our parks and green spaces, but the first indicator is all around that. How can we place a value against community usage? But we also considered a number of other indicators. So within Green Flag, although not all our sites have Green Flag, we do assess all of our green spaces against the Green Flag criteria, which looks at things like, is it a welcoming park? It looks at entrances and events and activities, community use. We also looked at volunteering, because a number of our parks have really well-established community groups that they report to us how many volunteer hours they put in each week, so we can start to build up an evidence base across the borough. We also looked at ease of public access, and that's something that came back from the public. They said it was really important that people are able to access parks and green spaces by public transport and not just to rely on cars. We looked at how they contribute to Knowsley's green space strategy, so economic, educational, health and well-being, the biodiversity. There's a number of indicators that you may recall in our 2015 strategy we set out, and in that strategy we actually scored every site against how it contributes, and that's what helped us put our 5-year action plan together. So how can we improve those green spaces so they give a wider offer? We also looked at, which it is a tricky one, around historical and cultural value. And again, we tried to look at national and regional evidence bases, but also local feedback and where we've known places have been designated. And that all helped to put the community measure together. Another important measure was recreational measure, so are parks and green spaces being used for sporting use? And obviously through our playing pitch strategy, we have quite a formal database about how sites are being used, and do they contain cycling and walking routes in there? So we were able to put together a number of indicators and assess the sites on that basis. Another important one was biodiversity. They obviously provide a very important natural habitat, and what we looked at is how we can capture that, the kind of value they provide to nature. An important one is around wildlife migration, so we looked at where the sites were located and how they connected to other sites. But we also looked at the actual value of the biodiversity, and there's lots of different national and regional databases that we could use. What I will say is it's been a desktop study. We've not been able to go out and assess it on a site-by-site basis, but we do have records, and some of that information is quite up to date because Biobank, based in the borough, do regular surveys in our sites. We looked at green space provision. This is a really important one. Both the board and the members of the public fed back through the consultation that it's really important that people have access to green space, that they can walk, whether it's to play areas or former parks or woodland areas. So we looked at, again, is it part of a network? So by losing that site, would it then disconnect other sites so you couldn't get around the borough? But we also looked to see what was in walking distances. And within the local plan, there's agreed what we call accessibility standards, and that defines how much green space should be in an area, both in a residential area but also in the wider community area. So you'll see there's definitions around 800 metres, which is about a 10-minute walk, 1.2 kilometres, 15-minute walk, and then 2.1, which is a wider 30-minute walk or a 5-minute drive. So each of the sites have been assessed to see what could be walked to within the local area. A little bit more subjective, but amenity value. Even if you don't use the green space, you do value from it by seeing it, whether you live outside a green space or even if you're just walking or driving by. So one of the things we wanted to capture was its landscape value. So how does it look to road users, or where there are a lot of houses, a lot of our parks, people either front on or back onto the site, so it's really important that that was considered. And then the final measure is all around its development potential, really. A lot of sites can or can't be developed for various different reasons. So is it suitable for anything else to happen on it? Does it have a technical function? So some of our sites actually have underground water storage systems on there that could never be developed. Is it attractive to a developer? You know, would anybody be interested in the site? Does it actually provide a financial contribution? A lot of sites don't actually provide any value. And does it have a specific designation preventing it from being developed, for example, greenbelt? So that just summarises how the criteria that the board selected was then applied using indicators to come up with the site scoring, which you'll see in the supporting documents.
Councillor Ashton.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I've read the information that you know has been done against each piece of green space and green park, but there are, as you would guess, with a desktop evaluation flaws, and I don't wish to be parochial, but I will, because that's the only one I can measure anything against, because it's the one I'm so familiar with, and that would be Field Lane. And I would guess that you could accept that it is an anomaly in terms of other pieces of green space and parks, because it's the only amenity apart from Lime Tree Woods, which is not directly the same type of amenity. It's a woods, not a play area or a park. And it is on the outskirts, on the very border of Knowsley. So it's to access Knowsley Parks would be a good 20-minute walk across a motorway for residents that I represent, and I have concerns about that, and I've raised those with officers. But that's the problem with desktop evaluations, isn't it? And maybe, you know, if elected members had been involved earlier on in the process, maybe we could have been part of that desktop evaluation, to be able to. There's lots of sites that I can absolutely agree with you that, you know, whilst we don't want to get rid of any, we accept that we will have to get rid of some, and it's those anomalies that are in that, and I'm sure there'll be other anomalies. That's only one that I'm familiar with. So it just again, you know, highlights the need for engaging with elected members at that desktop point to be able to get an even better view, or at least another view that may have helped inform the list.
Okay, John, did you want to respond to that? And then I've got councillors. Have I also got councillors on me as well?
I've got a question.
Okay, sorry. John.
I think, Chair, the only other issue, and we've spoken about this, Councillor Astor and I, and Councillor Harris, and indeed yourself, Chair, about the when we select the number of parks to be disposed of in order to protect the 144, is that we have two key indicators. One of those being we could only surrender up to 10% of the total number of parks, and we had to contain that within a £40 million endowment. So some parks, when you run the scoring, some parks on the first run didn't fall into the number of parks that we needed for the 40 million. So we had to readjust those. So you have to take out all the greenbelt parks, all those parks that are non-developable, and you've left with a number of other parks. Some of those parks, as Caroline said, are of little or no value. So if you left them in, you'd end up with more than 10% of your parks. So there was a process we went through where we had to take out the low value parks and put in a high value park, and that's how we ended up with the 17 parks. If you adjusted the 40 million down and you increased the 10% to 20%, we'd come out with a different number of parks, Chair. So the determining factors, aside from, you know, the robust and comprehensive factors that Caroline referred to, one of the key determining factors was around 40 million and the 10%. Adjusting those either way would give you a different number of parks, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Smith, and then I've got a question.
Yeah, thanks. Having listened to the last 4 or 5 minutes, I'm even more concerned now. First point I would like to get across to the officers in particular is that we're supposed to be working in partnership with town and parish councils. That does not appear to be the case with this particular item. I was listening to the officer with regard to the criteria of biodiversity, landscape value, can or cannot be developed. And again, if I was going to be parochial about Brownsfield and Prescott, you know, as a local councillor, working with the other councillors, we've just put a bid forward for £15,000 with the town council, working together in partnership to try and improve Carlane, Brownsfield, the approach there in terms of environmental improvement, help biodiversity, so forth, landscape value. I have a little press cutting here which clearly shows the site on Carnival Day, absolutely jam-packed with people having the most wonderful time, you know, if we're talking about community use. And I'm sure the same applies to Court Hay and other sites around the borough equally. And I'm just really taken aback as how the point scoring and how certain sites have been chosen. And clearly I'm unhappy about it.
Councillor Connor?
Yeah. Just to say again about the diversity of the board, we did try to make the board as diverse as possible so that we could get all of our residents' questions and worries, and that's why we tried to make it the town councils, we tried to make it the parish councils, we tried to make everybody who could help us, and that's what we went for with the board, and I think we've done a really good job there, thank you.
Also, if I may, Chair, as part of the September open public consultation that the review board undertook, there was a specific meeting with the parish and town councils where the clerks and a number of elected member representatives attended, where the chair of the review board explained the board's work, the research it had undertaken, the conclusions it had come to, invited them specifically to feedback into the review board's consultation. Also, Chair, since immediately after the Cabinet decision on the 28th of November, I wrote to each clerk within the parish and town councils, seeking a meeting with them and talking about how can we work collaboratively to join up this proposal initiative that the Cabinet had endorsed in order to benefit Knowsley. And we have had one meeting so far in respect to that. Clearly, proceedings today have stopped that process.
Councillor Finneran?
Thanks, Chair. That's just a clarification, really. You say none of the green flags have been touched on them. It's just, is Court Hay a green flag? But that's one of the ones that are proposing to be.
Yeah, so there's 18 green flags across the borough, and Councillor Connor made it clear that he wanted to protect all 18 green flags. However, you know, I'm sure everyone will be aware that following the National Wildflowers demise, that the council opened up an expression of interest process to ask the community about the future of the park and who was interested in running that park. We've had 27 responses to that expression of interest from a wide range of organisations, and some of those organisations would not wish to develop any houses on that park. They've got a number of other interventions and proposals that they've been thinking through, which might actually prevent the need for the council to actually dispose of that for housing. However, we're only part way through that process, Chair, so Cabinet recognised in its report that all 18 green flag parks status will be protected. There will never be development on the other 17 green flags, but in the case of Court Hay, we will see what the expression of interest and what the rest of the tender process brings forward over, we think, the next 6 months. And it may be that the £4.5 million that we think we've set against that park, it might be that one of those providers comes forward with an alternative proposal, which may mean that we don't require the value of that land. But at the moment, the proposition is for the front end of the park to be surrendered for development. We'll be able to come back within the next 6 months to let you know the outcome of that tender process.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to the financial aspect of this, I've got another question around. You've said the board got to a 10%, they've decided it was 10% to save as many, to save 90% and 10% to be sold. So I asked Caroline in the same email about when was an independent survey done on all the parks and green sites, and Caroline responded to say that there wasn't, but then there hasn't been any specific ones done, so to get the land value to make the 40 million. And then reading the full report of the Commission, page 162 and 163, it says the board used the data estimating the value of the land sale of 59 hectares to be worth between 494 and 80, I can't even read my own writing, 865 per hectare, potentially between 29 million and 51, and the estimated mean was a 40 million. So the data was correct 6 years ago, but that doesn't take into account all the other issues of the current value of land. Also, it doesn't take into account what could happen next year. These are big things, and it could cause a major issue for our financial systems. I don't want to say the word, but I'm sure everyone knows about that. And it also doesn't take into account the change of national government and how funding is taken into it. So actually, the board was given I found the data is wrong by 6 years, so I'm a bit concerned about how the board have made this recommendation on 6 years ago's data.
Okay, thanks Chair. Just in terms of who set the 10% target, the council was clear in its notice of motion that it agreed. So the council made that decision about the 10%. In regards to the 40 million and how that was constructed and the advice and support that we had and the data that we had to share with the trust, I'll ask Rupert to pick that issue up. Thank you.
Yes, Chair. So this was quite a detailed piece of the review board's research, and they actually took advice on this as they went and did their field trips to Milton Keynes, and when they spoke to the Land Trust, and actually took on board the expert information from a gentleman called Ian Taylor, who had previously worked for the Land Trust, but also with Peel Holdings as their Director of Partnerships, and had been involved in a lot of land sale acquisitions, the establishment of charitable trusts and their operations. So he was very familiar with these types of land sales, and they also used the expertise of officers from the council's asset management team as well to review the figures that were being put forward and the rates of return on the endowment, which are identified on page 161 of the review board's report. So using, yes, some perhaps slightly older information than we would have liked to, but also applying current knowledge of land values in Knowsley that officers have secured through their significant engagement with housing developers and commercial property developers over recent years. The view was taken because the review board's work is being undertaken at a strategic level, a high level, a conceptual level. in order to make a direction of travel recommendation to Knowsley Council, that the basis of the land values was acceptable for that level of undertaking that the board was involved in, that in applying the land values identified in their report came up with the 59 hectares, which was the 10% of the parkland identified in the borough. And then when you applied that to a 3.5% return, which was type of figure, a modest conservative figure that we felt would be relevant that the Knowsley Parks Trust could perhaps secure, then £40 million as an endowment, plus or minus 10%, as it's identified in the Review Board's report, was a reasonable assumption based on the information available to the Review Board to make to the Council, noting that, as referenced in the Review Board's recommendation, detailed analysis, market research on all of this detail needs to be conducted by Knowsley Council.
Yeah, I would just ask.
No, sorry, John, I'm going to just cut in there. So going back to Rupert, you've just said once again a detailed report is needed on all the sites. So why has the 17 sites been selected and has moved as a resolution? And just before Caroline comes in on that point as well, is that some of the criteria that you've used is actually as Councillor Ashton said, the desktop exercise, and it is very untangible and measurable. Sometimes it is down to an officer's perception. But I also want to raise the concern that, from what you've just said, is that if you live in a more affluent part of this borough, your park is more likely to go because of the value of the land. Is that correct? Or I've understood them two answers. And then Caroline and then Councillor Brennan.
Okay, Chair, I'll start with the assessment for land value. So obviously the board looked at it very high level, and that data is public accessible, so that's the data that anybody could look at from the local plan. When we've looked to apply this, we've had to do a desktop exercise to assess, for example, how much of the site will be developable, what contingency might be needed, because there could only be like so many properties on a site, and look at what the land is going in the local area. So as part of the Housing Land Disposal Programme, we have very accurate rates of rates per hectare that we've been able to apply. We couldn't do the site investigations because if we'd have started to go out and dig in the ground, people get really concerned. Even when we've just looked at United Utilities or somebody coming out, it really puts concern on. So there are site investigations that will be needed. We just couldn't do that until any decision had been made about taking it forward. With relation to about equality across the borough and different land values, there are clearly different land values across the borough, with some areas being much more high value and some low. The reason we've got all the different criteria is to make sure that that doesn't happen, so that we aren't just picking the sites that have the highest value. If we were to ignore all the other criteria, looking at some of the land values, you could probably in 4 or 5 sites, if that, get the 40 million. But because we've looked at access to green space, it's a much more, I suppose, equal assessment that's been undertaken. Thanks, Chair.
John, do you want to come back in? You're eager to get back in there.
No, I'll wait until after the questions are done, Chair, and I'll just...
Councillor Brennan.
I just want to touch on the endowment, John. The figure we're talking about, £40 million. A lot of money, £40 million. Or whatever way you wrap it up, it's a lot of cash. So, in looking at that, some of the impact that that could be on this £40 million and how it's developed, and it goes to some viability as well, as we're touching on things. There's going to be impact. I'll say it, but Sean didn't. There's Brexit, okay, and the impact that has. What's that going to have on there's inflation, interest rates, national government funding, local government funding, all going to have an impact on what's going to happen. And in particular, focusing on 3 things really. What will happen if there's a gap on projected funding forecasts, and if the core funding revenues are persistently lower than expected costs? Will this have an impact on future sales in terms of the need to sell more land? So are we going into a revolving door mechanism here? That's the first one I want to talk about. Second one, if there's a reduced demand for property, which in turn reduces the size of the asset, who carries the can? In terms of the payment back to potential loan, whatever it's called, in terms of the 40 million. If the fund loses value, what will be the impact on the council and the community? And then furthermore, in terms of the financial skills that's needed to manage all of this, in terms of the risk, there are big questions.
Thanks, Councillor Brennan. Thanks, Chair. My response was going to be cover much of what Councillor Brennan's mentioned. So there is great uncertainty with Brexit. There will be fluctuation in the markets. There are issues around land values over the 15-year disposal programme. There are issues about, and people are experiencing that now, access to mortgage finance in the marketplace. There are issues with interest rates. There are issues with developer confidence. There are many, many external factors that if we waited for absolute certainty and clarity on all those issues, A, we'd make a lot of money, and B, we might suffer paralysis by analysis and we'll never make a decision. You know, there will be national government changes, absolutely there will be, but that's no excuse not to deal with the scale of the problem that this council has faced year on year since 2010 and taken those difficult decisions in spite of those external factors. What I would add, Chair, is that there is a full business case that will have to be considered as Cabinet agreed at its meeting on the 28th. First an outline business case, then a full business case, where all these issues will be considered. Who's going to give the expert advice? What's the membership of the new trust going to be like? What is the expertise that will be on will each of those trustees hold? Where will the £40 million worth of endowment be held? Which finance company will hold that? How will it invest it? What's its investment strategy? All those matters will be considered as part of the outline and full business case, and Cabinet were absolutely clear on that. Chair, thanks.
Councillor Brown wants to come in and then we'll move over to the...
Thank you, Chair. Tony's quite correct. We haven't got a clue what happens in the future. We don't know that. But what we do know is that in 2019, the resources for our parks will not be there. And we can't wait until we get there to make a decision on this. It's important that we do something, we do it correct. And I believe that the skills that are required for the board who will take over this trust are the really important things. You need to get skills onto that so that these questions can be answered in the future.
I've got Councillor Brennan, Ashton Harris to come back.
Say it again, we all agree the impact of what's going on in terms of the parks, and something needs to be done. Nobody's disputing the fact. But what I think we should be saying is, and what he's just been saying to us is that, yeah, there is a little bit of a gun to our head, but it's about the risk management of this. Now, the risk management for this is imponderable as far as I'm concerned, because we're looking at something that we have, for what you're saying, we haven't got a handle on. So I'm not saying that we don't move forward around the viability. The business plan, from my point of view, should have been done a lot earlier, okay, before we started moving into this, because that increases the risk as far as I'm concerned.
Chair, can I just briefly, again, in terms of managing that risk, this isn't the end of the process, it's the start of the process, and Cabinet will have the ultimate decision on that and what risk they wish to exercise in October next year. Indeed, should the elected members be minded so, there is an option to find £1.3 million somewhere else in the council's budget if it didn't choose to pursue this route.
One final thing I just wanted to say, sorry to pick up on that, is the whole issue of governance, right? You know, 15 years ago we had KHT, and that was going to be everything for us and everything else. And, you know, our influence and impact on that has waned. I want to know what our governance is going to be before we start to do anything. So we've got a hold on it, and we have some influence about what's going on.
Chair, in terms of the governance arrangements, again in accordance with the Cabinet report and its recommendation, it was clear that the Council will have a key role on those governance arrangements, and that will be detailed in the report in autumn next year.
Okay, I'm just going to come in before, if that's all right, for the rest of the committee. You've said this needs a long time and process about how we've got to these decisions, and also about exploring the new management systems as well of how we manage the parks and some of the detailed work that is needed to do. So I'm going back to a scrutiny briefing report for the Overview and Scrutiny Board of August 2015, where Ruby Casey has presented, and lots of these recommendations are already in there. So if Scrutiny agreed to that report in 2015 and the work plan, why hasn't some of this work been done, and so we're not in this situation where it's all happening right now to us? That's more of a comment, but I'll let Councillor Ashton come in and then Councillor Harris.
Thanks, Chair. Just for the avoidance of any doubt, I, for one, am not against this proposal. Okay? Never said I was from any part from the beginning. I fully understand the stresses and the financial problems that the council having to wrestle with every single day. We see it. We know exactly how bad it is. And you know what I am struggling with, and it goes back to my very first point, is we accept that something has to be done. It would have been better if all of this examination, business case, workforce implications, financial implications, both now and long term, had been done prior to the Cabinet taking this decision. Indeed, it should have been really the decision that the Cabinet took was an in-principle decision, but that wasn't. It wasn't an in-principle decision. Cabinets have taken a decision without a business case being in place, without implications of the workforce being addressed. And that's, I think, what my colleagues will speak for themselves, but that's my struggle. And that's why I don't want to come to a recommendation here, Chair, because I don't want to stifle the end, but that's what I'm struggling with.
Okay, Councillor Harris, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think James just tabled it all up, what we're talking about here and how we all feel about the decision before members were aware of they had taken before us now. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, did John or do you want to, Councillor Connor, sorry, want to respond to those questions?
I wasn't intending to respond to those questions, Chair, but in just coming back to your issue about the 2015 scrutiny report, sorry, I haven't got a copy in front of me, but again, what I would suggest is, I'll time to read it. What I would suggest is, obviously we want to follow due process. Cabinet agreed its notice of motion, I think it was last November, in January, sorry. So we agreed the notice of motion in January to establish the independent board to explore this piece of work and come up with a set of recommendations. So whilst we acknowledge that was the outcome from the scrutiny review, this has been a difficult path to navigate in terms of what those options might be. So the independence and robustness of the board was paramount here. What we have obviously done is not try to second guess Cabinet's decision. The board could have done its work and Cabinet could have decided at that point it wasn't going to pursue that issue any further, and there was other alternatives for delivering the £1.3 million saving. So that's why we've not delivered the business case at this stage. Again, it's been consistent throughout the process. The commentary about we should have had this business plan fully considered before Cabinet made this decision. But again, Chair, I'd point to a number of decisions Cabinet have made where the business case has not been fully developed. It's been done in a 2 or 3 stage process whereby those business cases have come forward to Cabinet to make the final decision, and therefore what this decision is following the precedent that's been set in other previous developments.
Okay, Councillor Ashton, do you want to come back on that? Just before you do, I will say that is quite clear. The whole work plan is, I don't know, you haven't got a copy, John, in front of you, but that is quite clear, and members were asked to comment on that work plan. I don't have the minutes and I wasn't on the council at the time, but the whole work plan is about methodology and also how we look at the future of our parks. So if Scrutiny Overview Board agreed in 2015 for this work to start, I'm concerned why it hasn't started. And on that as well, there is also the thing of, it just seems like it went to Scrutiny and Overview Committee. I'm going to let Councillor Ashton come in there.
Just on the final point that John made about, that's the methodology that we've used in the past. Precedents have been set. Youth service was Youth Mutual, turned into the Youth Mutual a few years ago. I'm pretty sure, I'm not saying because I haven't got the information in front of me, but I'm pretty sure that it was quite clear before the decision was made what the workforce implications were going to be. They were all going to be two-peed over or moved in with it. That was very upfront, clear to elected members whilst making that decision. You know where the workforce were going to end up, to be crude. That's not the case with this one. I can go back even further. KHT, back in 2001, it was pretty certain when we made the decision to stop transfer where the staff were going to go. So, you know, so there have been decisions made in the past in the council. We're not clear at the moment, whilst the cabinets have made this decision, what the implications for the workforce are, because they're just not in that report. And that's part of the reason why this report's been called in. So, you know, there are precedents that would suggest that workforce implications have been dealt with prior to decisions being taken.
Okay. John.
The only comment I'd make is, you know, the establishment of the trust is a clear indication of where the workforce is going to be. The workforce will be employed by the trust, albeit that the detail of that we've got to talk through over the next 12 months when we go through the full detailed business case, and those recommendations will be made clear at that point in the Cabinet report.
In this report?
Well, I was just going to ask, can you highlight that in the report, please, John, what you've just said? Just to give you more time, do you want me to let Councillor McGlashan ask his question, or do you want to keep...
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Councillor McGlashan?
Well, you know, the question is the first question I asked. This will be coming back to us again, and I think the question that's been asked tonight, the officers and the Cabinet member fully realise what is expected of them and, you know, what needs to come back to us, because I think most of the questions on the call have been answered this evening.
Okay, we found that where it highlights the staffing implications will be transferred to the trust in the report.
So Chair, the actual review board had quite a lengthy discussion about workforce implications.
Again, is it in this report?
In this report,
in the Cabinet report.
In the Cabinet report, recommendation 7 in the appendix, it says that
page number so everyone can make sure.
In the proposed Cabinet response, it talks about ensuring the Trust has professional management and operational staff. And the reason why the review board didn't specifically talk about the transfer of the existing staff within the council is because that wasn't within the remit of its terms of reference set by the council, and didn't fit with the expertise in terms of the HR implications to provide any specific recommendations in respect to that, which is why the review board has set a strategic direction of travel for the council to consider, whilst appreciating that in implementing that strategic direction of travel, the council will have to review and implement a range of detailed issues, including the HR implications of this report, which is why a subsequent report on those matters will be brought to the Cabinet in due course.
Chair, Chair, I'll go back to my initial point. We've always made decisions when it's been part of either transferring stock, the housing stock, or we've been moving services to outside of control. We've always known the direction of travel for staff, and I would put, I don't dispute what you've said about the review board. That's not within their remit, and I fully accept that, but it's Cabinet's remit to make that, and that's not in the report.
Chair, the only thing I would say is we'll go back and check previous cabinet reports to see what that the basis was of those developments, whether that be KHT, the youth service, the leisure service, and the ADM for domiciliary care.
Thanks, you can check that. That's one of the reasons why this was called in, because the concerns around the staff workforce. So, and as you've correctly said, it's not highlighted in the report. Does any of the rest of the committee have any other questions that they wish to ask? I have one, if that's all right with the committee. Identified in the 17 sites, 6 of them sites are currently leased or in ownership of town councils or parish councils or community groups. Can I ask, they must, I don't understand the park system and how it's all there, but I'm assuming they must pay or manage their parks and land for the council, and that's why it's leased to them or they're in the ownership. So why were they included on the 17 sites if another organisation is maintaining them and running them currently? No, yeah, at no cost to the authority.
So up until a couple of years ago, all the lease sites were managed and maintained by Knowsley's Green Spaces team, and as part of the ongoing funding requirements, the charges were introduced probably about 2 years ago for grounds maintenance in the town and parish councils. Within the town and parish councils, they split, some retained with the council for grounds maintenance and some went privately, but the actual capital programme associated with those parks has still been retained with Knowsley Council. So although the revenue, the cutting of the grass and the day-to-day litter picking and maintenance, the capital programme really is still the responsibility, and that's just as great as the revenue. So some of those sites can be several £100,000 a year when an asset fails, for example replacing a footway or replacing play equipment. And what we've done in the past and what we continue to do is work with the town and parish councils to secure external grant funding. So working for whether it's a play equipment, we've gone for funding for play equipment, we've secured section 106 to make improvements, and we've worked and supported friends and community groups within those sites. Obviously it is a challenge because obviously there is in some circumstances a 99-year lease on those sites, but the challenge would be what would happen after 99 years. They could come back to the council or any time really.
Okay, and then the last, Councillor Donnelly.
Just on that then, so the parish councils that have a 99, or they've had a 99 years, it's obviously less now. Regarding those, the town councils that have the leases on these sites, what's going to happen with these? How if the town council doesn't want to release, have they got to release? What's the process that happens there?
Chair, so Councillor, I suppose what the next process would be to start to have those conversations. So some of the work we looked at is looking ahead. So at the moment, if you take Knowsley Village for example, for the number of sites, we know what the day-to-day maintenance is, but we can start to look over 25 years what the capital replacement programme is, and it runs into the millions when you look at across a number of sites. So one of the things we wanted to do is future-proof all parks and green spaces within the trust. So instead of the town and parish councils having to pay, whether it's through the precept or additional funds raised for those green spaces, all of the spaces will be maintained by the trust, and that freed up resources within the town and parish councils to fund as they saw fit.
So you're saying that they have to release them sites?
No, what we're saying, Chair, Councillor Donnelly.
Sorry, because also it comes down to consultation, and it just doesn't seem good enough, the consultation with the councillors, with the town councils, with the public. Do you have any idea what sort of plans the town council have for certain sites? They could have plans, they have things already set up, they may have spent thousands of pounds already.
Yeah.
Where's the consultation? Because now you're saying that you're now going to have work, you're going to speak to them.
Yeah. So these are recommendations from the review board, and what we now need to do is start that dialogue as Knowsley Council with the relevant parish and town councils. We're keen to do that, and as I said before, to do that collaboratively on the basis that we're looking for a solution for Knowsley that protects the majority of parks and green spaces forever. In working in collaboration with the Borough Council, the parish and town councils, as Caroline's outlined, should save revenue expenditure in terms of what they're paying to maintain the sites now. They will also have the opportunity to avoid any ongoing capital costs associated with maintaining those parkland areas. And also, we're aware from the trusts that the review board engaged with, that they're able to access other grants and other funding sources that the council can't do at the moment, even in conjunction with Friends of Parks groups. So there's a sound business case, and I appreciate that there's a loss of these sites as well in certain areas for the parish and town councils to engage with the Borough Council on this agenda. There's also mitigation that we can put in place to help where there's a loss of a particular parish and town council park as well, in terms of re-provision potentially for areas of lost parkland or improvements to neighbouring parkland sites to offset that loss.
So,
Chair, I think the point Councillor Donnelly is getting to is aside from the consultation, and we believe the consultation has been A, on the board itself, and B, through the consultation process throughout the summer. Aside from that, if the parish and town councils choose not to engage collaboratively and choose to refuse any intervention, then we will have to revisit the 17 sites and the 10% of sites to be surrendered, and it may well also require us to revisit the issue around the numbers of green flags. There is lease arrangements on one site in Prescott, where we obviously want to work collaboratively, but there are particular clauses within that whereby the council could exercise a notice period and recover that site. On some of the other sites, the flexibility doesn't necessarily exist in that documentation, so we would have to revisit those sites.
Okay, before Councillor Donnelly wants to come back, I've got Councillor Smith and Finneran who wants to come in as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, John, it sounds rather like a veiled threat to Prescott, that.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that, but it
Councillor Smith
needed a response.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
I'm sorry I've got my parochial hat on. But
Councillor Smith, just hold
yeah.
on for one moment.
Yep.
I appreciate all the members of the public who've been really patient, but we just need to make sure everyone can hear the responses, and so Councillor Smith's point can be heard. That's all, and I thank you for everyone who's sitting there, and I can see how many people are very hot as well in the room. So just going back to Councillor Smith, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. There is another side to this coin. You know, I sit on this committee, and at the last few meetings we've been talking about the council getting smaller and outsourcing and so forth. And what I'd like to just, I did try at previous meetings to get this point across, and just an open mind would be good. That the town and parish councils are perhaps given the option, yes, an option to surrender the lease, or to continue to fund the maintenance of the land under a continued lease agreement, or that KMBC would actually transfer the ownership of the land to that town and parish council through some sort of agreed purchase arrangement. And that where there are no town and parish councils existing at the time, maybe an option for a similar arrangement be made with local community groups, friends, which other people have mentioned, and that the town and parish councils are courage to be formed, you know, in areas in May 2019, such as Kirby or Huyton or Roby, wherever, because I think they're the closest form of local authority to the people, much closer than, with respect, Knowsley. They have their finger on the pulse, they can gauge the feeling within the communities, despite the consultation, which seems to have not been good enough. And, you know, those people, I think, who live in their local communities, what's coming back to me, John, is that they're saying enough is enough. We've had the release of all this greenbelt land for development, and the parks is a step too far. But if we, rather than look out, we look within our communities, and particularly in areas that are town and parish, then there may be an alternative solution along the lines that I've said.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, and I'll let Councillor Finneran come in.
Thanks, Chair. Manchester, I'm not fully understanding. Half of this is due because of costs and what have you. But like the likes of the town councils and parish councils who don't have the borough to do their grass cutting and things like that, but yet some of them have been in, some of them areas have been put in with the land to go, where it's not costing the borough anything at this moment, because town councils or the parish council, whatever, are already paying for that anyway. So maybe I'm being a bit naive, but I don't understand why that they've come into the process if they're not costing the borough anything, if you understand what I mean.
Okay, I've got Councillor Connor, and then I'm assuming Caroline wants to respond to that as well.
No, not on that specific topic. What I'm saying is that your officers need to talk to the boroughs and the town councils, and they need to sit down and discuss the way forward. And that is the important part of this. It's important that we sit down, we talk about what's going forward, and I think it's really important that we realise that we need to do something. As Jane said, it's not that we need to do something, and what we're recommending with our discussions with the town councils and the parish councils, it was probably going to be the way forward.
Caroline, and then John.
Thanks, Councillor Finneran. It's just really to explain that the solution we were looking for was something across all parks and green spaces. So although there'll be maintenance contracts in place for the day-to-day operations, the bigger costs are the capital replacements. So when we looked in the review board, we did actually look at the different town and parish councils and actually try to calculate, you know, looking forward over the next 25 years, say for example in Halewood, what the cost of all the capital works, which isn't factored into the maintenance contracts you have at the moment. So it was just trying to future-proof it, because the costs were going up and nobody seemed to have the money to pay for any of the maintenance.
Just to add to that, just to add to that information.
John was next, sorry, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just go back to Councillor Smith and the issue of a consultation. You know, everyone will have a view on how robust the consultation was, keeping it tidy. We were experts in this field. Have said that this is an example of best practice. We received 2,500 responses from across the whole of the community on this issue. In terms of this has come as a big surprise to the parish and town councils, it really shouldn't have done, because the parish and town councils have been members of the independent board since the beginning of this review in January of this year. You know, some of whom took that responsibility on board and others didn't. Yeah. But this is no surprise. They've been involved in this from the outset. Yeah. The last point on collaboration. The last point on collaboration, we will be talking to the town and parish councils about what the future implications are and the opportunities and the future costs are for those sites.
I'll let you two choose between who's going to go first, Councillor Donnelly and Councillor Finneran, because you both put the hands up at the same time.
And you say that we've been, as a town councillor, you say that we've been a sort of in the loop regarding this. Well, Neil Joseph, who was in the loop, wasn't able to tell us any information. He was bound not to tell us anything. So he was the only one that knew anything. Councillor Finneran.
Right. John, you said that that the town council and the parish councils were involved in with the thing, but didn't you also say before that they wasn't involved in saying which parks will go or whichever one will go? So how can the town council or the parish council then say the question that I just asked you? You just totally confused me more now. Sorry.
Okay, we better thank John.
Okay, so when the review board was established by Knowsley Council, and it had its first meeting in March, and the representation as identified on page 10 of the papers this evening, and that the board members kindly agreed to take part as board members. There were representatives, as we've seen, from the parish and town councils, from the borough council as well. And the review board's chair made it clear right at the outset that what the review board members needed to do was to look at this as a strategic issue based on their experience, but attend the board on an individual capacity. So they were coming from a parish and town council, but they weren't actually on the board representing that parish and town council. And the review board chair explained that he wanted to, for the course of the, I think probably the meetings that the board had during April, May, June and July, to keep the information and dialogue and research that the review board was doing within the review board members, because he wanted the review board members to see the full picture of the issues, the research, the opportunities, the threats, the risks, the financial issues, before they made a decision in terms of their identified preferred way forward, their preferred option. At the point where the review board was able to identify that preferred way forward, which it did at its meeting at the end of July, and was about to embark on its public consultation, as we spoke about earlier, that was at the point where the chair said, right, board members, you now please now need to go and engage with your stakeholder groups, your friends groups, your various networks across the borough, in order to promote what we've been doing and to seek the views from your colleagues in terms of the board's now published preferred way forward. And that largely happened during September of this year. So it was at that point, as I said before, that we then had the meetings with the parish and town council representatives as part of that process of consultation. So whilst the review board members did include the parish and town councils, they kept their powder dry while they were doing their research, as instructed by the review board's chair. Then when it was time to make those ideas public, they engaged and went out and explained, promoted and sought feedback.
Okay, I'm just really conscious that we can't hold to account the review board. We can only hold to account the cabinet, and I don't want to continue much longer. I appreciate everyone's expressed concerns around the consultation with the members of the public and with that with town and parish councils, and I think that's been noted so far. So don't want to stifle. Is there any the committee's got? Is that a hand up there, Councillor Harris? Do you want any more questions at all? Okay, I think there's no other questions from yourself or any of the committee members. So I'm going to move on to the next stage of the meeting, if that's okay. So we need to decide as a committee on which reactions which are available to this committee to represent the best way forward of taking into account everything that's been discussed and the cabinet member and the officer's response. So as highlighted earlier on by David, we have the option of dismissing the call-in, referring the decision back to cabinet for reconsideration, or referring the decision to full council for debate. I'm looking for a mover or a seconder of one of these options, and if the mover and the seconder can also clearly explain the option of why they want the committee to take this action, in particular how they relate to the reason for the call-in and the response we have considered tonight. Councillor Ashton.
Chair, can I move that we refer this back to Cabinet for reconsideration? It's more of a, and I've not got anything written down, I'm just going to say a few words and someone may be able to cobble something together for me, but based on the information that I've had tonight, and I absolutely understand the problems and the you know the seriousness of the budget constraints that we have for this particular service. And I, as I said earlier on, don't disagree with the decision that we have to do something about this and set up the trust. I haven't got a problem with that. The only thing that it's become blatantly obvious to me, and from what I gather from other colleagues as well, that we should have started this process a different way. And it's a plea to Cabinet more than anything, to take a pause, allow the officers to do the detailed business plan, which does obviously need to be done. Allow them to have those conversations with parish and town council colleagues. Allow us to come up with some workforce implications that were, you know, that give both elected members and the workforce some comfort. And we can then make an informed decision with all of the information to hand, in the knowledge that it's affordable, that we're looking after our workforce, and that we're looking after our green space and our parks. It's a plea, Chair, that for Cabinet to just pause and look again and do it the other way around. Come back in autumn. We know there's another opportunity to have a bite at this. But let's go out and do a little bit more detailed work and get the community with us and the elected members with us, because we've been, as elected members, for decisions that have been taken, and I've already flagged up problems with a particular park in my ward. I would like the opportunity to sit down with officers and go through those problems, and maybe we can add something to your desktop investigations that you've made. So I'll move that, Chair.
Okay, I've had someone move a motion. Can I not move a motion? Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Brennan. Yeah.
I'll second that, and basically just support what James just said, but also add a little bit more if I can of the reasons why. I fully agree that decisions like this, we don't want to make decisions like this, but we've got to look at it and agree decisions have to be made. This process here has been informative and it's been realistic, and this should have been done, I would suggest, before this process started, in terms of finding out a little bit more about what some of the issues were, because scrutiny is about challenge, it's about asking questions, it's about informing, it's actually about making the decision that gets made a better and smarter decision. So this is why I think this should have happened. But we've had this opportunity to do this now, and I take the plea from what James just said to Cabinet to do what James just said. I can highlight from my point of view the business plan, the lack of one. You know, we've got to start looking at that and what James just said. The workforce stuff, you know, I didn't get adequate answers to what I wanted there really. The risk around the funding, and also the involvement of communities and ward members. So that's why I think that we should be looking at this again, and I'll second what James just said.
Okay, thank you. I can't bring you back in, unfortunately. I don't think. Can I bring Councillor Connor in? The votes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do I see anyone else wishing to speak from the committee? No. Can I put that to a vote then? So just to confirm with all members of the committee that Jane's motion is to refer this back to Cabinet for reconsideration to consider the issues around the workforce and the lack of, this is just my notes, and I'll make sure these formal notes going back to Cabinet with this, to include the workforce, to also to include the members to help identify the sites and also be part of the desktop process, and also to allow more consultation to be made with the town and parish councils and community and friends groups as well.
There shouldn't be anything that there's a problem with that, because that's what's going to happen next anyway. if I'm right in what's been said tonight. So allow all that to happen, but just defer the decision until we have all that information to hand, so that we can make an informed decision, so that we're comfortable, it's affordable, we have a strategy for our workforce, and we're comfortable that we can bring our communities and our elected members together with identifiable sites, if that sums it all up.
Sums it all up, and I will make sure I watch the YouTube video to make sure I've got that correct.
I hope you said it loud enough.
for that. So I'm now going to move to the vote. Can I see all those in favour of the motion that Jane's put forward? Okay, that's unanimous. That's unanimous. You all agree, yeah? Okay, there's no one abstaining and there's no one disagreeing to that. Okay. So I'd like to thank everyone this evening, officers and members of the public, for attending this evening, and the committee members for the robustness of the questions. I still haven't finished, so I will. I didn't get this opportunity very much, so I'd like to thank everyone and wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you very much.